Good evening. I'm Paul Fredette.
And I'm Karen Fredette.
Together, Karen and I have been ministering to hermits and to religious solitaries through Ravensbread Ministries, right here from our home in Western North Carolina, for nearly 17 years now. And a wonderful thing happened in early March. We were given this gracious invitation by Brother Sean Bradley to participate in the efforts of the Interfaith Franciscan community by presenting weekly programs on the Doves for Peace channel. For the past 7-8 months or so, it's been our pleasure and our privilege to share these moments with you. Most recently, we've been retelling the story of Clare of Assisi. The reason we've been retelling the story of Clare is not only because she was such an extraordinary woman of her own time, the 13th century, a courageous, an inspired, and a strong-willed person. She was in many ways a woman ahead of her time. She was the first female follower of Francis of Assisi and the founder of the Poor Ladies, or as they have come to be known in history now, the Poor Clares. But even more importantly for us, and the reason for our retelling the life and times of Clare of Assisi, is that she's very much a woman for our own age. She's very much a woman who can inspire people today, we believe, to respond fully, wholeheartedly, and dramatically to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Most of the material that we're using in our presentations is coming to us from the work that Karen herself did when she was living as a Poor Clare in Canton, Ohio, at the monastery of Sancta Clara. And for 10 years, she researched the life and times of Clare of Assisi. And she brought forth that research in, what was it, Karen?
1984.
In 1984.
And then we had a reprint done in just last year, 2012, to celebrate the 800th anniversary of the founding of the Poor Clares.
Clare, Her Light and Her Song is the name of that publication. And if you are interested, as we move along in these presentations, you can obtain this book from Ravensbread Ministries by visiting our website, ravensbreadministries.com, or by emailing us at pkfredette@frontier.com. When we left off last week in our presentation, we had been talking about the challenges that faced both Clare and Francis as they moved into the 1220s. It was the challenge of a great deal of growth, as well as in this beyond the great growth, which was wonderful. The monasteries of both the ladies, the Poor Ladies, were spreading. The numbers of friars were growing. But the challenge was to keep the original spirit, the original way of life, the original undiluted response to the words of the gospel, to live in complete poverty and to dedicate oneself completely to Jesus Christ in the preaching of the gospel, both in prayer, in cloistered hermetic prayer, if you want, as the ladies were doing, or by traveling itinerantly through the roads, the roadsides, the villages, the countrysides of Italy, preaching as the friars did. It was a difficult time, and finally, after a great deal of struggle that we talked about last week, Francis did obtain approval for a rule, an approved way of life from Pope Honorius. The Apostolic See granted this approval in 1223. despite the approval and all the work that went into it, it didn't satisfy all the friars. And there was still a great deal of unrest and division, fractiousness that was very, very upsetting to Francis. Nonetheless, in late November, when he received news of the approval of the order, Francis, or the approval of his rule, Francis was ecstatic. And there was a newfound joy and a newfound enthusiasm and a much stronger measure of peace that had come over him as he approached the Christmas season.
And one of the things that not everybody realizes that though Francis was known as a preacher, almost, in fact, none of his preaching has actually been written down. He didn't write it down to begin with, and so none of it has been preserved. But what has been preserved are the parables, as it were, that he acted out, and which brought the sense of the humanity of Jesus to the fore.
It's not really surprising, is it, Karen, since it was really it was Francis's just heartfelt way of life that really is what set other people on fire and filled them with the desire to follow him.
Yeah, it was who he was more than what he said that made the difference. But he appealed to the lay people, who were mostly poor. And once he came through this difficult period of writing his rule so that it reflected the gospel, he sent a message to a friend of his, a nobleman named John, who lived near Greccio, which was a little town a little bit outside of Umbria. And he said, if you want me to spend Christmas with you, which I would like to do, I want you to make these preparations. I want you to go up the mountainside near you, and you will find a cave where the friars often prayed. I want a manger set up in that cave. I want an ox and an ass brought to that cave. My friars and I will come there on Christmas Eve, and we want to celebrate Mass in a way, he says, that shows the full life of Jesus as a baby, as a child. Up till that time, most of the emphasis on Jesus was as the adult and the risen Christ who preached to them. With Francis, we've come to begin to see the humanity of Jesus, and that took place on December of 1223. The nobleman John did as Francis requested, and then his biographer Celano said, the day of joy drew near, the time of great rejoicing came. The brothers were called from their various places. Men and women of the neighborhood prepared with glad hearts according to their means, candles and torches that lit up the night. They were planning to celebrate Mass in the middle of the night on the mountainside. And they sang on their way up the mountain, and they said, the saint of God was clothed with the vestments of the deacon. He was an ordained deacon, and it is possible that he was wearing one of the albs that Clare made for him. It's been preserved, this beautiful alb, and it's possible that Francis had Clare with him in that way, wearing the alb that she had made for him. And then it said that when he preached to the people, standing about with charming words concerning the nativity of the poor king in the little town of Bethlehem, allowing the people to identify from their little town to what it was like, A certain virtuous man saw a little child lying in the manger, almost lifeless, and then he saw the holy man of God go up and rouse the child as from a deep sleep. And his biographer goes on to say this vision was not unfitting, for the child Jesus had been forgotten in the hearts of many, but by the working of his grace, he was brought to life again through his servant Francis. And so if anybody wonders where the practice of the creche, the crib that is all over the Christian world, came from, it came from this incident, which just took place at this little altar, which is now in Greccio. I visited there, and there's a lovely fresco above the altar, which was, of course, painted afterwards, showing the Virgin Mother nursing her baby. And when you walk in there, you still have a sense of both the poverty and the reality of the humanity, the birth of Jesus among us.
So this location here that is showing on our screen right now in Greccio is the site of the first Christmas crib or creche, as it's known in many parts that we celebrate today.
The swiftness with which Francis' literal representation of the Bethlehem scene swept through Europe was amazing, and it testifies to the response in the people's hearts. I'm sure that the poor Clares picked it up, and from then on, there's a beautiful story about Clare later in her life with regard to Christmas celebrations, which were very important always to the poor Clares. But this devotion to the God-man, the child, came out in Clare's writings several times, especially in her rule. She would exhort her sisters to be, as she said, conformed in their little nest of poverty to the poor Christ, whom his poor little mother had laid as a babe in a narrow manger. And in her rule she wrote, "For the love of the most holy and beloved child, who was wrapped in the poorest of swaddling clothes and laid in a manger, and of his most holy mother, I entreat you all, my ladies, to always wear only the poorest of garments." So she moved the hearts of her sisters by appealing to them through the humanity of Jesus.
And his poverty.
And his poverty. That was.
And his very kind of humble beginnings in the manger.
Mm-hmm. Right. Mm-hmm. But it was these acted out sermons that are remembered from Francis' life, and the experiences that he had more than the words he spoke. Mm-hmm. Paul wants to tell us about probably the most significant spiritual event in Francis' life.
Well, as we said just a few moments ago, Francis was still very troubled by all of the divisions within his order among the friars. He so wanted the friars to live as one, in peace, as one family, with joy and equanimity and tranquility, and this was not the case. There were still so many tensions and so much argumentation. Francis really was having a difficult time, and his soul was not at peace. He was extremely troubled. So much so that by the end of the summer of 1224, he informed Clare, sent word to her that he was planning to make a special Lent, a special Lenten season. It was not Lent, of course, but he was going to begin a special time of penance, prayer, and fasting. And he was going to do this from the 15th of August, the Assumption of Mary, until Michaelmas, which was September 29th, the feast of St. Michael the Archangel. And to do this Lent, he was going to go in the company of a few brothers. We think Brother Leo and Brother Illuminato. Mm-hmm. And he traveled with them to an amazingly rugged place, about a 2-day walk
Yeah.
from Assisi itself, a place called Monte La Verna. Monte La Verna is a mountain, and it was on a tract of land that had been donated some years before to the friars by someone who really knew them well, a wealthy man who knew them well, and knew of Francis's love for the lonely, deserted, isolated places where he could pray alone in seclusion, which was the want as well of many of the early friars. And so he donated this tract of land with just a wild and woolly place, just full of rocks and crevices. And it was one of those places where the roots of the trees had grown up gnarled within the rocks and everything. And it was not an easy place to be. And it was not a place that invited a lot of traffic. So it remained quite isolated and a wonderful place for Francis to go and pray in quiet and in reclusion.
Yeah, I went up there and we went up on a bus. And there were several times when we were going around some of the curves that I wondered if that bus was going to make it. But I guess the driver knew. But this was a mountain that had been cracked several times with earthquakes. And so the rocks were broken apart and in columns
Jagged and
piled on top of one another. It was a very, very rugged and impressive place. And even though we got up on a bus, there was a point at which you could go no further. And if you wanted to go to the place where Francis actually prayed and had his great experience, you had to walk it,
mm-hmm.
which was another good 45-minute tramp uphill.
Mm-hmm. So at any rate, Francis finally winds up in as much seclusion as he wants. And before he even goes apart from his companions to be alone, he prays with them and asks one of his companions to open the book of the Gospels, as was his wont. And wherever the page fell open, that was to provide the focus and the orientation for his prayer and meditation. Well, he asked them to do this, and 3 times in succession, they opened the book of the Gospels, and the page opened to the account of Jesus's passion and death on the cross. And so Francis took that as a very strong indication from the Lord that that was to be the focus of his prayer, his fasting, and his penitence while on this Lent. So Francis goes apart. We really don't know how long he was apart from the companions. And as far as the particular experience that I'm going to recount now, we really have no idea exactly how long it lasted. All of his biographers say, however, is that on or about the feast of the Exaltation of the Cross, which would have been September the 14th, Francis was so caught up in prayer, in deep prayer and love for Christ crucified, he was caught up in a rapture of sorts and in a vision. And in his vision, he saw a seraph, a flaming seraph, coming from the heavens. And in the midst of that seraph, now a seraph, in case you're not up on your angelology, a seraph is a 6-winged spiritual being with huge wings, 6 of them, 2 over their head, and 2 in flight, and 2 covering the rest of their body, or whatever.
Yes.
In the midst of that flaming seraph, Francis caught sight of the crucified Christ. In his vision, the crucified Christ himself appeared in the midst of this flaming seraph. And like I say, however long this took, we really don't know. There's another beautiful illustration of this over here that we'd like to just take a minute and show you. And it kind of more or less depicts more of a nighttime scene. But here is this flaming seraph and Francis caught up in prayer. And when Francis finally did come back to himself, his own body, here's yet a third illustration from a medieval painting of this same experience. When Francis came back to himself, he found that on his own body, he bore the marks of Christ's passion, the stigmata as it has come to be known. He bore in his hands, in both hands, and both the insteps of his feet, the marks of the nail wounds, and even the heads of the nails themselves protruding through this were visible apparently. And in his side was the wound made by the lance that is recounted in the gospel narratives, the Passion of Jesus. Francis, of course, was dazed by all of this and took a while for him to kind of make some kind of sense out of this experience. But one of the things that came out of this was that Francis really was part of Francis's inner turmoil as he undertook this Lent was the feeling that the dissension within the order, the divisions among the friars, all of the problems were in part due to his failure to truly carry out the commission that the Lord has given him. And that this was a sign, somehow, the troubles in the order were a sign of the disapproval of Christ, whom he was trying to follow, and that somehow he had failed his Lord. Well, this experience, more than anything else, and for the rest of his life, really reassured him that his life was intimately and closely united with the passion and suffering of Jesus Christ, and that his suffering on behalf of the order, his turmoil, his sadness, his discouragement, this was all part of the sufferings of Christ himself, and that he was united with Christ on the cross. Because of the severity of the wounds and the pain and discomfort it caused, Francis could no longer walk. From then on, wherever he went, he had to be physically supported by a couple of the brothers. There were 4 of them that accompanied him all the time.
Yes.
And he had to ride a donkey. He could not walk any longer.
Any distance, no.
Any distance at all. And when he left Mont Laverna, of course, he really didn't know how much he should try to conceal this, which was in some ways very awkward and very difficult, although it was a humbling and a wonderful, just an amazing experience. But the rest of the brothers prevailed upon him to that if Christ had bestowed on him this kind of experience, it was for him to share. It was so that this would be known. And so he left Mont Laverna and he traveled back to Assisi. And of course, when he got back to St. Mary of the Angels, Friar Elias, who had now become Minister General and was really running the order, so to speak, on a practical day-to-day basis, took one look at Francis, and between the newly received wounds that reflected Christ's passion, as well as the very debilitated physical state that Francis was in because of the eye disease that had worsened tremendously, his almost constant headaches, a stomach disorder that had only gotten worse over the years, and a general weakness. Brother Elias wanted him to be treated, decided that it was time for serious medical attention, right?
Yes. Brother Elias felt that perhaps the Pope's own physician, who was dwelling in Rieti, I believe, might be able to do something, especially for the eye condition, which was a disease he brought back from the Orient. And this, of course, was just the beginning of winter, and it was not a propitious time to travel, nor to have any serious surgeries, as they were contemplating. So Francis spent that winter at St. Mary of the Angels. And as soon as the weather improved a bit, he was to go to Rieti. However, just before he left, he felt like he wanted to say goodbye to Clare. He knew it would be a while before he could see her again. So he went up he was on the little donkey, and was just about an hour's ride from St. Mary's to San Damiano, where Clare was. When Clare came out to see him, she was alarmed.
Mm-hmm.
Here she saw him so weak he could hardly hold himself up on the donkey. His inflamed eyes were giving him the most severe pain. He was feverish. He was so emaciated from having so little to eat or keep down that that contributed to his weakness as well. So Clare said, what any good Italian woman would, no further. You are staying right here. And she had the friars take him to the little hut where the questors or their chaplain would stay at San Damiano. It was sort of like at the foot of their garden. And she had Francis put up there. She had woven mats brought down so that they could block out any bit of light, because he couldn't bear it. A man who loved Brother Sun so much and Brother Fire, he couldn't bear their light. It was so painful for him. So she had the hut fixed up for him. She had learned a lot about caring for the sick over the years from her mother initially. So she made cooling poultices that would at least bring some relief to his eyes. She cooked up soups and other easily digestible things to help give him some strength. But it was 50 days, 50 long days, that Francis lay there in the dark, unable to move about. And one thing that Clare did not know about was that that little hut was infested with mice who gave Francis no peace day or night. It's now, for Francis, who ordinarily loved all little animals, there must have been something particularly bad about these mice. It said that there were so many mice running here and there around him and even on him. They prevented him from taking a rest. They even hindered him greatly in his prayer. They annoyed him not only at night, but also during the day. When he ate or tried to, they even climbed up on the table. Evidently, Francis did not entertain any great sense of brotherhood with these particular rodents, and it may be that the brothers' conviction that they were diabolical infestation might have had some truth to it. But there came the moment one night where Francis was so assailed that he was exhausted more than usual, his biographer says, because of his many severe pains, and he began to pity himself deep in his heart. After all, he was human like the rest of us, and you can only bear so much. And I think the mice were the icing on the cake. But at length he prayed in agony, and as he did, he had a marvelous vision internally, and he was told by the Lord that if the whole earth and the entire universe were turned to precious gold, and you were told that you were going to be given a treasure by which that kind of gold would be nothing, would you not be happy? Would you not be able to bear this more willingly? And he said, I would indeed be happy. And the answer came back, rejoice therefore, for your sickness is a pledge of my kingdom. Await the inheritance of that kingdom steadfastly and assured, because of the merit of your patience. And this Francis understood, that he was assured even before death that he was going straight to heaven. And this would, a humble man like him often doubted that kind of thing. And all of his pain suddenly meant nothing when he realized what was to come for him. When the friars came in to care for him in the morning, they found him ecstatic with joy, and he struggled to tell them about the experience he'd had. And finally, he did what he often did when he couldn't speak. He began to sing. There was this melody, there was these words um, rising up within him, and he burst out into song. And it is now what we have called the Canticle of the Creatures. He sang it for the first time for the friars in Clare's garden. And I'd like to think that Clare heard what was going on.
Mm.
But what he sang goes like this. Most high, all-powerful, good Lord, yours are the praises, the glory, the honor, and all blessing. To you alone, Most High, do they belong, and no man is worthy to mention your name. Praise be you, my Lord, with all your creatures, especially Sir Brother's Son, who is the day, and through whom you give us light. And he is radiant and beautiful with great splendor, and bears a likeness of you, Most High One. Praise be you, my Lord, through sister moon and the stars. In heaven you formed them, clear and precious and beautiful. Here he mentions Clare. He says claritate, of the stars. So Clare is in his song. He goes on, praise be you, my Lord, through brother wind, and through the air, cloudy and serene, and every kind of weather, through which you give sustenance to your creatures. Praise be you, my Lord, through our sister water, which is very useful and humble, and precious and chaste. Praise be you, my Lord, through brother fire, through whom you light the night, and he is beautiful and playful and robust and strong. Praise be you, my Lord, through our sister, Mother Earth, who sustains and upholds us, and who produces varied fruits with colored flowers and herbs. I can imagine the song dying away and the brothers standing there, mouths open, listening to something more beautiful than they had ever heard.
Mm.
So Francis began to teach them how to sing the Canticle of the Creatures as it has come to be known. But there is more to this canticle than I just shared with you.
Now Francis was stronger. He was well. He had to continue to make his preparations to go to Rieti. But as he was preparing to leave, no doubt he talked with Clare, and Clare must have informed him, given him news of what was about in Assisi and in the surrounding areas. One of the young sisters in the monastery at this time, a woman named Agnes, was actually the daughter of the podesta of Assisi, the podesta being the equivalent of the mayor of Assisi. And Clare undoubtedly had learned from this young sister, whose father was the mayor, about recent happenings within Assisi. How somehow The mayor had run afoul of Bishop Guido, and Bishop Guido, in a rage, had excommunicated him. And in return, the Podesta had prohibited anybody in Assisi from transacting any kind of business with the bishop. And lo and behold, the whole town was in an uproar. The whole city of Assisi was taking sides. There was all this strife, all of this struggle, all of this just ugliness and hatred and nastiness going on. And it was just, the situation was just, municipally, was just deteriorating by the day. Well, Francis, learning of this, undoubtedly from Clare, composed one more verse to the Canticle of the Creatures. And Karen, would you read us that verse?
He said to the brothers, I want you to learn this one. Praise be you, my Lord, through those who pardon for your love and bear infirmity and tribulation. Blessed are those who endure in peace, for by you, Most High, they shall be crowned.
Francis called two of the friars, and he taught them this verse. And he made them repeat the rest of the canticle, and then he sent them to Assisi on a mission. He bade them to call upon the Podesta and to request that the Podesta go to the square in front of the bishop's residence and to assemble with him there as many of the citizens of Assisi as he could. And once they were all assembled there, with the bishop looking on, no doubt, from the entryway to his residence, the two friars commenced to sing the Canticle of the Creatures. And when they had finished with the final verse that talked about pardon and forgiveness and reconciliation, the Podesta and all who were in the square were so overwhelmed by the beauty of the canticle and the song that the friars had sung that the Podesta threw himself at the feet of Bishop Guido and told him, whatever you want me to do to atone for my behavior, I will. The bishop, on hearing this, confessed to the Podesta that he should have been humble enough and not flown into a rage and asked for the Podesta's forgiveness. And so they sort of fell on each other's necks, weeping and embracing one another and forgiving one another. And Assisi averted a lot of internecine strife and possibly even warfare and killing and all that kind of stuff, simply out of the beauty and the truth, the deep spiritual truth that the Canticle of the Creatures embodied.
Francis then was going to be leaving Sister Clare and the poor ladies. And as he left, he wanted to thank them. And he did so in the way that was most spontaneous for him. He did it as a troubadour would for the chatelaine of the great castle. He composed another canticle that was written just for the poor ladies. And it's not very well known, and there's reason for that, because although they knew he had composed it, they thought that it was entirely lost. And it was only recovered and authenticated in 1976. One of the Franciscan friars was doing research at the convent of the Poor Clares in Verona, Italy. And he found this among the papers. It was a 14th century. Clare and Francis were in the 13th century. This was a 14th century manuscript, and he vouched for its authenticity in large part because the text was written in the dialect of the Umbrian Valley, and thus it was very closely associated with the Canticle of Brother Sun, which was composed also in the same language. Almost everything in those days was written in Latin, and the Canticle of Creatures is one of the first recorded things that was written down in what was becoming the Italian language. So it only became available in 1978 when it was published. And we would like to share that with you also. And as you listen to it, you may become aware that it sounds so much like the Canticle of the Creatures that it may have been, in my humble opinion at least, an alternate ending for the entire canticle. But this,
what we'd like to do is have Karen read it first. It's really beautiful, and it bears repeating twice. And then afterwards, we'd like to offer you a sung rendition, because it was meant to be sung. It's a canticle.
Francis looked at Clare and he wrote, "Listen, little poor ones called by the Lord, who have come together from many parts and provinces. Live always in truth, that ye may die in obedience. Do not look at the life outside, for that of the Spirit is better. I beg you, through great love, to use with discretion the alms which the Lord gives you. Those who are weighed down by sickness, and the others who are wearied because of them, all of you, bear it in peace. For you will sell this fatigue at a very high price, and each one of you will be crowned a queen in heaven with the Virgin Mary."
Karen, that was so beautiful. Let's try it again, and I'd like to, since we're going to offer you the text along with the song, let's read it one more time, just quietly and prayerfully, shall we?
Clare is talking to the poor ladies. Listen, Francis. Listen, little poor ones called by the Lord, who have come together from many parts and provinces. Live always in truth, that you may die in obedience. Do not look at the life outside, for that of the Spirit is better. I beg you, through great love, to use with discretion the alms which the Lord gives you. Those who are weighed down by sickness, and the others who are wearied because of them. Francis and Clare both knew a lot about sickness. All of you, bear it in peace. For you will sell this fatigue at a very high price, and each one of you shall be crowned queen in heaven with the Virgin Mary. This is the medieval language of the troubadour. And a 20th century poor Clare, Sister Briege O'Hare, who lives in Ireland, set to this beautiful canticle of the Clares, of the poor ladies, to music. And we would now like to play that for you. And as Paul said, we have the text so that you can follow it.
You have been gathered together from many parts of this land. Live always in the truth, that you may die in obedience. Do not look at the life of this world. Do not look at the life outside, for the life of the Spirit is better. For the life of the Spirit is true. I beg you in my love for you, that you use with kindness what the Lord gives to you, and don't be weary with the care of your seed. I ask you to bear it in peace. Do not look at the life of this world. Do not look at the life outside, for the life of the Spirit is better. For the life of the Spirit is true. I promise that each one of you will be crowned in heaven as a queen with the Virgin Mary, through the merits of the Mother Clare. And so be it. Amen.
I can almost see Francis sort of bowing as the troubadour would to his lady of the castle. He was leaving San Damiano for perhaps the last time. He would get treatment at Rieti and by the Pope's own physician, but nothing helped. Francis was dying. You want to tell about that, honey?
Well, when he was close to death, after he was through with all the treatments at Rieti, he was at the bishop's palace, presumably for the last time being with Bishop Guido. And it was there that his physicians finally approached him, and told him that death, his own death, was very near. And Francis's response to this, so characteristically Francis, he thanked God finally, and thanked God for sister death. And in the realization that death was coming for him, he composed the final stanza for the Canticle of the Creatures, naming death itself among those creatures of God for whom we must praise God and give thanks. Karen, would you read that as we thought perhaps the best picture, since the Canticle of the Creatures is so filled with images of nature, we thought this image of winter would be best to focus on as we presented this last stanza for the Canticle of the Creatures.
You might call it Francis' last song. Praise be you, my Lord, through our sister bodily death, from whom no living man can escape. Woe to those who die in mortal sin. Blessed are those whom death will find in your most holy will, for the second death shall do them no harm. Praise and bless my Lord, and give him thanks, and serve him with great humility.
So beautiful. So
Yeah.
beautiful.
Francis sang his way through life. It seemed very, very beautiful, meaningful that he should sing his way into death.
Francis does manage to keep his promise to Clare, the promise that she would see him again.
She was very ill at the time he was dying.
And so Francis is taken back to St. Mary of the Angels, to the Portiuncula, and in a small enclosure nearby there, which they referred to, I believe, as Francis' shack, even now, on the 4th of October in 1226, he died, surrounded by the friars. And in the morning, everybody had assembled, and they placed Francis's body on a stretcher, and the friars carried him in procession together with the clergy and the other assembled people from the town of Assisi, and they carried him in procession to the monastery of San Damiano, where the doors were open and the grate behind which the sisters visited with whoever was from outside the monastery was opened, so that the sisters could see and touch and embrace Francis for the last time.
It was said that after he died, all the larks sang, yes, but I was going to say his body, which had been dark and gaunt and emaciated, became white and supple and beautiful. The wounds remained, and these Clare was able to kiss, we think, at this time. But they said he seemed to die as the smiling saint.
And Francis, they said, it was interesting in reading the biographies, because they said that Francis actually was easier to look at and to discern a smile from in death than he ever had been in life. Francis was not a comely person to look at. He was not particularly handsome. He was short, he was small of stature, and he never was a commanding presence in the sense of his physical presence. It was more Francis radiated the Spirit of Christ, and this became even more pronounced and more physically apparent in his death, as he was finally conformed to the image of his crucified Lord. As we come to the end of this presentation tonight, we would like, as always, to thank you for taking this time to be with us. We are really enjoying taking this time with you, and we want to also thank Brother Sean and the other members of the Interfaith Franciscans and the Doves for Peace channel for helping us in so many ways to make these presentations possible. We also want to remind you once again that if you do want to get in touch with us, you may do it through ravensbreadministries.com, or you may email us at pkfredette@frontier.com. And as always, we would like to close our presentation by invoking God's blessing on all of us this evening in the words of St. Clare herself. May the Lord bless you and keep you.
May he show his face to you and be merciful to you.
May the Lord turn his countenance to you and give you peace.
May the Lord be with you always.
And wherever you are, may you be with him always. From Karen and I both, good night.
God be with you.